Welcome to this explainer brought to you by Forge College. So if you joined us for our last lesson on multisig tradeoffs, you already know the vulnerabilities, right? You know the gas-guzzling features, and you definitely know the operational headaches that come with smart contract wallets. But here's the thing. Knowing the theory is really only half the battle. Today, we're taking all those terrifying what-ifs, and we're drafting a concrete design brief so you can actually build the thing without losing your mind, or, your entire treasury. Now, this is a classic Web3 trap. We sit around, we brainstorm all the absolutely terrifying ways our wallet could be hacked, and then we just hand those vague panics over to the devs. But think about it. You wouldn't ask a construction crew to build a skyscraper by just saying, hey, make it sturdy, please. No way. You give them blueprints. So today, we're learning exactly how to draw those blueprints. All right, here's our blueprint for today. 1, we'll break down the 3 layers of trust. 2, we'll establish a step-by-step threat workflow. 3, we'll see this blueprint in action. And 4, we'll finalize our design. Let's dive in.
Section 1, 3 layers of trust.
Okay, before we enthusiastically slap a bunch of cool features onto our contract, we absolutely need a solid mental model. Why? To keep our security assumptions from just leaking all over the place. I want you to think of your multisig like traditional corporate governance. Stick with me here. The key layer is your board of directors. That's who holds the power. The coordination layer is the boardroom procedure, the voting, the vetoes, those endless meetings, and the execution layer is the corporate seal. It's how an action is actually enforced on-chain. You've got to keep these separate, so changing how the board votes doesn't accidentally fire the board members.
And this is exactly why that mental model is so crucial. It perfectly maps where your mitigations actually belong. Let me give you a classic mistake: throwing a time lock at the execution layer to solve a stolen key problem. That's literally useless. If someone steals a hardware wallet, a time lock just gives the thief a 24-hour waiting period. They're still an authorized Steiner, right? You have to map the concern to the specific layer and solve the actual problem.
Moving right along to Section 2, the threat workflow. Now that our trust boundaries are drawn, we need a systematic way to turn those abstract threats into a checklist the devs can actually use. We start by cataloging our absolute worst nightmares, like 3 signers going rogue and fleeing to a private island. We evaluate the severity, assign the threat to its proper layer, and then translate it into a specific feature. So a vague goal like, hey, let's limit large transfers, becomes a highly concrete per-transaction cap.
Next up, we define exact acceptance criteria. Basically, how do we prove it actually works? We also have to be realists here. If your DAO does thousands of daily microtransactions, a gas-heavy on-chain voting system is going to bankrupt you. So record those constraints, accept the trade-offs, and ruthlessly prioritize your minimum viable product. Security baselines first, fancy escape hatches later.
Your blueprint must be objectively verifiable. Ambiguity is the enemy of security here. If you just tell your devs to prevent replay attacks, they might just guess at what you mean. But if you tell them, implement on-chain nonsense for off-chain approvals with domain-separated payloads, boom, you have given them an exact, highly testable target. All right, Section 3, the blueprint in action.
Let's apply this workflow to a highly realistic scenario. Imagine we're drafting a smart contract wallet for a mid-sized DAO. They need a 305 multisig. Their signers are geographically distributed, which means we can't just yell across an office to verify a transaction. And crucially, they are highly gas-conscious. They do a ton of small daily operations, but occasionally they need to move massive amounts of treasury funds. So how on earth do we balance that?
Well, to balance that rock-solid security with everyday usability, our blueprint sets up a dual-path approach. For those small, everyday transfers, we use a per-transaction cap. That means they execute immediately, saving on gas and keeping daily operations super fast. But if someone tries to move a massive chunk of the treasury, the contract hits the brakes, demanding a full quorum and enforcing a strict 24-hour time lock. And because of those strict gas limits we talked about, we really have to prioritize our MVP scope. Nonce replay protection and per-transaction caps, those are absolute must-haves. Now, what about a massive Guardian escape hatch that requires a 4 of 5 quorum to emergency eject funds to a cold vault? I mean, incredibly cool, very dramatic, but let's be real. It's an optional Phase 2 feature. You've got to secure the baseline first. Finally, Section 4, finalizing your design. Okay, we have our mental model, our threat workflow, and an MVP scope. Let's lock in the core takeaways. If you want your engineers to love you and your auditors to actually pass you, your final design brief needs these 3 things. First, layered separation.
Know exactly which trust boundary you're modifying. Second, explicitly testable acceptance criteria. Leave literally zero room for interpretation. And third, a pragmatic, prioritized scope that respects your real-world operational constraints.
I'm going to leave you with this to test your own blueprints. When you look at your design documents, do you see executable code constraints or just vague hopes and prayers for security? Remember, a secure multisig isn't born from wishing. It's born from meticulous drafting. To dive deeper into this subject and explore the rest of this Web3 learning track, be sure to visit forge.college. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and happy designing.